In the Martinez mansion, an imposing residence in the hills of Los Angeles, secrets and resentments were about to explode. Emily, an intelligent and compassionate young woman, lived there with her stepmother Victoria, a cold and controlling woman, and her adopted sister Sophie, a sweet young woman confined to a wheelchair. Emily could hardly imagine the challenges that awaited her when, in a simple act of kindness, she met Nathan, a mysterious and amnesiac man, on the bustling streets of the city. This unexpected encounter would soon trigger events that would reveal a dark past, threatening to expose Victoria's true power and forcing Emily and Nathan to question everything they believed about themselves and their origins. Who is Nathan really, and how is his fate tied to this powerful family? And will Emily's struggle against Victoria's manipulations manage to bring justice and redemption for everyone? Let's find out. But before we dive into this story full of unexpected twists and lessons of love and forgiveness, comment from where you're watching this, and if you like stories of overcoming adversity and family mysteries, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one. The sun rose lazily over the opulent Martinez mansion in the hills of Los Angeles. Its golden rays filtered through the silk curtains, illuminating Emily's face. One so young, she got up with a sigh, knowing that another day of tension and contempt awaited her. As she dressed, her gaze fell on a framed photograph on her nightstand, herself as a child, smiling next to a middle-aged man with kind eyes. Richard, her adoptive father, the only one who had truly loved her in that house. "I miss you so much, Dad," she whispered, gently touching the glass of the frame. Emily went down the stairs, her steps echoing on the polished marble. As she entered the dining room, the atmosphere changed instantly. Victoria, her stepmother, was seated at the head of the table, her posture rigid and her cold gaze fixed on Emily. "You're late," Victoria snapped, her voice sharp as the edge of a knife. "Do you think you can lounge around all day? Don't forget your place in this house." Emily clenched her fists, but maintained her composure. "Good morning, Victoria. I'm sorry. It won't happen again." "I hope not," Victoria replied, her tone dripping with contempt. "After all, you should be grateful for everything we've given you. Not everyone picks up a child from the street and treats her like family." Victoria's words were like poisoned darts, designed to hurt and humiliate. Emily sat in silence, enduring the avalanche of disparaging comments that were the daily bread in that house. Her only consolation was the presence of Sophie, her adopted sister, who gave her a look of sympathy from across the table. Sophie, confined to a wheelchair due to a degenerative disease, was the only genuine bond Emily had left in that family. Despite being Victoria's biological daughter, Sophie had never shared her mother's contempt for Emily. On the contrary, the two young women had forged an unbreakable bond over the years. After breakfast, Emily hurried out of the house, needing to escape, if only for a few hours, from the suffocating atmosphere of the mansion. She walked aimlessly through the streets of the city, observing the bustle of people, the hustle and bustle of street vendors, life pulsing on every corner. It was then that she saw him for the first time. Sitting on the sidewalk, his back against the wall of a building, was a disheveled-looking man. His clothes were ragged and dirty, his hair tangled, but there was something in his eyes that caught Emily's attention, a mixture of sadness and dignity, as if he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. Without thinking twice, Emily approached a nearby food stand and bought a sandwich. Then, with a determined step, she headed towards the man. "Excuse me," she said softly, extending the wrapped sandwich. "I thought you might be hungry." The man looked up, surprised by the gesture. For a moment, his eyes met Emily's, and she felt a strange connection, as if somehow they shared the same pain. "Thank you," he murmured, taking the sandwich with trembling hands. "My name is Nathan. I'm Emily," she replied with a warm smile. "It's nice to meet you, Nathan." As Nathan ate, Emily sat down beside him, ignoring the curious glances of passers-by. For the first time in a long time, she felt she was doing something meaningful, something that went beyond Victoria's expectations and prejudices. What Emily didn't know was that this simple act of kindness was about to trigger a series of events that would change her life forever. From the shadows, a pair of eyes watched her, plotting the next move in a cruel game of which she was not yet aware. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Victoria looked out the window, her face a mask of contempt and determination. "It's time to put that girl in her place once and for all," she murmured to herself, her eyes gleaming with a malicious light. "We'll see how long her compassion lasts when she faces reality." The sun was beginning to set over Los Angeles, tinting the sky in shades of orange and purple. But for Emily, the real darkness was just beginning to descend. The evening was settling over the Martinez mansion when Emily returned, her mind still occupied by her encounter with Nathan. As she crossed the threshold, the heavy and tense atmosphere immediately enveloped her, as if the house itself conspired to suffocate her. "Emily!" Victoria's voice resonated from the study. "Come here immediately." With a resigned sigh, Emily headed towards the source of the voice. She found Victoria seated behind the imposing mahogany desk that once belonged to Richard. The older woman looked at her with a mixture of contempt and anticipation that made Emily shudder internally. "Where have you been?" Victoria asked, her tone laden with accusation. "I went for a walk in the city," Emily responded, keeping calm. "I needed some fresh air." Victoria let out a scornful laugh. "Fresh air? Or perhaps you preferred the company of street scum?" Emily felt her blood run cold. How could Victoria know about her encounter with Nathan? "I don't know what you're talking about." She tried to defend herself, but Victoria interrupted her with a brusque gesture. "Don't take me for a fool, girl. I have eyes all over the city. Did you think I wouldn't find out about your little charitable adventures?" Victoria stood up, circling the desk to approach Emily. "But don't worry, dear. I've decided it's time for you to learn a valuable lesson about real life." Victoria's syrupy tone did nothing but increase Emily's unease. "What do you mean?" "Oh, it's very simple," Victoria replied, her lips curving into a cruel smile. "Since you seem to have so much interest in helping the less fortunate, I've decided that you will marry that homeless man you so kindly fed today." Emily felt the ground open beneath her feet. "What? You can't be serious. That's insane." "Is it?" Victoria arched an eyebrow. "I think it's perfectly reasonable. After all, isn't that what you've always wanted? To help those in need? But you can't force me to marry someone I barely know," Emily protested, her voice trembling with disbelief and fear. Victoria moved closer, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Oh, but I can. Or have you forgotten who controls this house? Who decides about your dear sister Sophie's treatment?" Emily's heart stopped for a moment. Sophie, her sweet sister, completely dependent on the medical care Victoria provided. "You wouldn't dare," Emily began, but the look in Victoria's eyes told her that yes, she would dare anything. "It's your choice, dear," Victoria said, her voice loaded with false sweetness. "You can marry your homeless friend and ensure that Sophie receives the best care, or you can refuse and watch as I drastically reduce her medical attention. What will it be?" Emily felt the walls closing in around her. She was trapped, cornered by Victoria's cruelty and her own love for Sophie. With a heavy heart and a barely audible voice, she responded, "Fine, I'll do it." Victoria's smile widened, triumphant. "Excellent decision. Tomorrow we'll go find your future husband. I'm sure he'll be delighted with the news." Emily left the study with faltering steps, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. How had it come to this? How could Victoria be so cruel? She headed to Sophie's room, desperately needing her sister's comfort. As she entered, she found Sophie reading a book, her face lighting up upon seeing Emily. "What's wrong?" Sophie asked. Immediately noticing the distress on her sister's face, Emily collapsed next to Sophie's chair, tears finally running down her cheeks. Between sobs, she told her sister everything: the encounter with Nathan, Victoria's trap, the impossible ultimatum. Sophie listened in silence, her eyes filling with tears. When Emily finished, she took her sister's hand in hers. "You can't do this, Em," Sophie said with a trembling voice. "You can't sacrifice your life for me." But Emily shook her head, determined despite her pain. "I have no choice, Sophie. I can't risk your health. I'll find a way out of this, I promise." The two sisters embraced, united in their pain and in their love. Outside, night had fallen over Los Angeles, and with it, the shadows of the uncertain future that awaited Emily. In her room, Victoria poured herself a glass of wine, savoring her victory. Soon, Anna, she murmured to herself. Soon you'll see your place in this world as ungrateful girl. And when you do, you'll remember that it was your own compassion that led you to ruin. Victoria's plan was in motion, and Emily, unknowingly, was about to embark on a journey that would change her life forever. The days following Victoria's revelation were a whirlwind of emotions and changes in the Martinez mansion. The truth, though painful, had opened the door to a new dynamic among the members of this complicated family. Nathan, now aware of his true identity as Luke Martinez, struggled to reconcile his fragmented memories with his new reality. Emily, for her part, was torn between the relief of finally understanding the origin of Victoria's contempt and the confusion about her relationship with Nathan. One morning, as they all had breakfast together, a novelty in itself, Victoria made a decision that surprised everyone. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice laden with an uncharacteristic humility, "and I believe it's time we do things right." "Luke," she said, addressing Nathan, "you deserve to reclaim your place in this family and in society. I'm going to annul your marriage to Emily and start the process to restore your legal identity." The silence that followed was broken by Sophie. "Mom, that's incredible. But what will happen to the company, to everything you've built?" Victoria sighed deeply. "Half of the company rightfully belongs to Luke. As for the rest, I suppose I'll have to face the consequences of my actions. If that means losing my position, so be it." Nathan, still processing everything. Family, for the first time, a real family. The following days were a frenzy of activity. Lawyers came and went from the mansion, preparing documents and strategies to restore Luke's identity and undo the forced marriage. The news that the lost heir of the Martinez family had been found spread quickly through Los Angeles, social circles, generating a wave of curiosity and speculation. In the midst of all this, Emily and Luke, as he now preferred to be called, found moments to talk privately, processing together the dramatic turns in their lives. One afternoon, sitting in the garden, Luke took Emily's hand. "You know, despite all the strange and painful aspects of our situation, I'm grateful to have met you. You showed me kindness when no one else did." Emily smiled softly. "And you gave me hope when I needed it most. Maybe all of this had to happen so we could find each other and heal together." Meanwhile, Victoria worked tirelessly to make peace with her past. With Sophie's help, she began to organize a foundation dedicated to helping homeless children and families at risk, an attempt to redeem her past actions by doing something positive for the community. One night, Victoria called everyone to her study. With tears in her eyes, she handed an envelope to each of them. "This is for you," she said with a trembling voice. "They're letters that Richard wrote for each of you before he died. I've kept them all these years, too cowardly to face the truth they contained." With shaking hands, each one opened their envelope. Richard's words, full of love, forgiveness, and hope, resonated in the room as they read in silence. Luke's letter spoke of a father who never stopped looking for him, who always maintained hope of finding him someday. Emily's reaffirmed the unconditional love that Richard felt for her from the moment he adopted her. For Sophie, there were words of pride and encouragement, urging her to never let her condition limit her dreams. And for Victoria, surprisingly, there was forgiveness. Richard, in his last words, expressed his understanding for Victoria's actions, motivated by fear and pain, and his hope that she would someday find peace and redemption. When they finished reading, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. At that moment, united by the love of a man who had seen the best in each of them, they felt that something fundamental had changed. The barriers that had separated them for so long began to crumble. Victoria, with a broken but determined voice, spoke, "I know I can't erase the past, but if you give me the chance, I'd like to try to be the mother and the person that Richard always believed I could be." Luke, Emily, and Sophie looked at each other, and then at Victoria. In their eyes there was caution, but also a glimmer of hope. The path to healing would be long and difficult, but for the first time in a long time, it seemed possible. As night fell over the Martinez mansion, a sense of change hung in the air. Secrets had been revealed, truths faced. Now, united by a shared past and the promise of a future to build, this unconventional family took its first steps towards redemption and reconciliation. The months that followed were a period of transition and adaptation for all the inhabitants of the Martinez mansion. The truth, although painful, had paved the way for healing and forgiveness. Luke, operations in recent years, he began to familiarize himself with the empire that was now partially his. One afternoon, while reviewing some documents in the study, Luke looked at Emily with a mixture of admiration and gratitude. "I don't know how I would have done this without you," he said softly. "You're amazing, you know that." Emily felt herself blush slightly. "I just do what I can to help. After all, we're family, aren't we?" The word family resonated between them, loaded with new meanings and possibilities. Meanwhile, Victoria worked tirelessly on the foundation she had created. With Sophie's help, who brought a fresh and compassionate perspective, the foundation began to make a real impact in the community. Victoria, for the first time in years, "Mom, are you okay?" she asked, concerned. Victoria smiled through the tears. "Yes, honey. It's just that, for the first time in a long time, I feel at peace, as if I'm finally doing the right thing." Sophie took her mother's hand. "You are, Mom. You're changing lives, including ours." At home, family dynamics continued to evolve. Dinners, once tense and silent, had become moments of connection and conversation. One night, during one of these dinners, Luke proposed an idea that took everyone by surprise. "I've been thinking," he began, "about how we can honor Richard's memory and at the same time look to the future. What do you think about renaming the company? Instead of Martinez Enterprises, we could call it the Richard Martinez Foundation. We would combine business with charitable work, ensuring that a significant part of our profits goes to social causes." The silence that followed was broken by Victoria. "I think it's a wonderful idea, Luke. Richard would be proud." Emily nodded enthusiastically. "We could focus our efforts on education and support for homeless children, give them the opportunities that Luke didn't have when—" Her voice trailed off. Aware of the delicacy of the subject, Luke smiled at her, grateful for her consideration. "Exactly. Transform our pain into something positive for others." Sophie, her eyes bright with excitement, added, "And we could include programs for people with disabilities, make the city more accessible and inclusive." As they discussed the details, Victoria observed her family with a mixture of pride and remorse. How had she been so blind for so long? How had she not seen the potential for goodness and unity that existed among them? The following days were a whirlwind of activity. The transformation of the company into the Richard Martinez Foundation became the project that united the family like never before. Working together, each contributing their unique strengths, they began to shape a vision that honored the past while building a better future. Luke Utt, with his first-hand experience on the streets, provided an invaluable perspective on the real needs of marginalized communities. Emily used her administrative skills and compassion to design effective and sustainable programs. Sophie became the voice of inclusion, ensuring that all initiatives were accessible to people with disabilities. And Victoria, surprising everyone, proved to be a skilled negotiator, using her connections to secure support and resources. One afternoon, while reviewing the plans for a new community center, Emily noticed something different in the atmosphere. The tension that had permeated the mansion for so many years had dissipated, replaced by a feeling of shared purpose and, yes, even love. Looking around, she saw Luke leaning over the plans, his face lit up by the passion of creating something meaningful. Sophie was animatedly explaining her ideas to make the center more accessible, and Victoria, to her surprise, was listening attentively, taking notes and asking insightful questions. At that moment, Emily felt her heart swell with emotion. This was the family she had always longed for, united not just by blood or legal documents, but by a genuine desire to do good and heal together. As the sun set over Los Angeles, bathing the Martinez mansion in a warm golden glow, Emily knew that, despite all the pains and struggles of the past, The Richard Martinez Foundation was not without its challenges. As news spread through the business circles of Los Angeles, the family faced skepticism and resistance from some sectors. One morning, Luke entered the dining room with a furrowed brow, holding the day's newspaper. "Look at this," he said, spreading the paper on the table. The headline read, "Madness or Strategy? The Controversial Decision of the Martinez Family." Emily read the article aloud, which questioned the wisdom of combining a profitable company with a charitable foundation, suggesting it could be the end of the Martinez empire. Victoria, surprising everyone, was the first to speak. "Don't let this discourage you. Remember why we're doing this. It's not just about business. It's about doing the right thing." Luke nodded, gently squeezing Emily's hand. "Victoria is right. We knew it wouldn't be easy, but it's worth fighting for." Sophie, determination in her voice, added, "Besides, who says we can't be successful and do good at the same time? We'll prove them wrong." Motivated by this newly discovered family unity, they redoubled their efforts. Emily and Luke spent long hours in meetings with investors and partners, explaining their vision and how they plan to make the new model sustainable and beneficial for everyone. Victoria Chungxias, for her part, used her social connections to organize fundraising events, surprising everyone with her ability to turn even the toughest skeptics into passionate advocates for the cause. Sophie became the public face of the foundation, giving inspiring interviews and sharing stories of how the foundation's programs were changing lives. As the months passed, the results began to speak for themselves. The first community center of the Richard Martinez Foundation opened its doors, offering education, healthcare, and employment opportunities to hundreds of people in need. One day, while overseeing the inauguration of a new job training program, Luke turned to Emily with a smile. "You know, I think I finally understand what Richard wanted for all of us. It wasn't just about running a successful business, but about creating a legacy of kindness." Emily nodded, feeling a warmth in her heart. "It's true, and look at what we've accomplished together. I'm sure he would be proud of all of us." That night, at the mansion, the family gathered for a celebration dinner. Victoria, with tears in her eyes, raised her glass. "To Richard," she said, "whose vision and love have guided us to this point, and to us for having found our way back to each other." As they toasted, each reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Luke, who had gone from being a homeless man to a compassionate leader. Emily, who had found the strength to forgive and the courage to lead. Sophie, whose determination had inspired everyone around her. And Victoria, who had found redemption through service to others. However, despite the triumphs, there were still challenges to overcome. The transformation of the company was still a work in progress, and the wounds of the past, although healing, still left scars. One night, as Emily walked through the garden, she found Luke sitting alone, looking at the stars. "Are you okay?" she asked, sitting beside him. Luke sighed. "Just thinking about everything that's happened. Sometimes I still find it hard to believe that this is my life now, that I have a family, a purpose." Emily took his hand. "I know. It's been an incredible journey for all of us." "Emily," said Luke, turning to look her in the eyes, "I want you to know that, no matter what happens, I'm grateful to have you in my life, not just as family, but as something more." Emily's heart skipped a beat. Was Luke suggesting what she thought he was? Before she could respond, a scream from the house startled them. It was Victoria's voice, filled with panic. "Sophie! Help!" Luke and Emily looked at each other for a second, the moment interrupted but not forgotten, before running towards the house. What they found there would once again change the course of their lives, testing the bonds they had forged and the strength of their newly discovered family unity. Luke and Emily burst into the house, their hearts racing frantically. They found Victoria on the floor of the study, holding Sophie, who seemed to have collapsed. "Call an ambulance!" Victoria cried, her voice broken with fear. As Luke rushed to call emergency services, Emily knelt beside Sophie, taking her hand. "Hold on, Sophie," she whispered. "We're here with you." The minutes that followed were a blur of frantic activity. The ambulance arrived, and Sophie was quickly transferred to the hospital. The family followed in Luke's car, the silence in the vehicle heavy with worry and fear. At the hospital, the hours of waiting seemed endless. Victoria paced back and forth, her facade of control completely shattered. Luke and Emily stayed close together, offering each other silent comfort. Finally, the doctor came out to speak with them. The diagnosis was serious. Sophie's condition had significantly worsened, and she would need an experimental treatment that was only available abroad. The treatment is expensive and risky, the doctor explained. But it could be her best chance. Victoria, with determination in her voice, declared, "We'll do whatever is necessary. Money is not an issue." It was then that reality hit them. Much of the family's resources were now allocated to the foundation. Sophie's treatment would require a considerable sum that could jeopardize everything they had built. Luke and Emily exchanged glances. Without saying a word, they both knew what they had to do. "We'll use the foundation's funds," Luke said. "Sophie is more important than any project." Emily nodded, but Victoria surprised them all. "No," she said firmly. "We can't do that. Sophie would never approve. We've made a promise to the community, and we must keep it." "But Mom," Emily protested, "this is Sophie's life we're talking about." Victoria took Emily and Luke's hands. "I know, and that's why I'll sell all my personal shares and properties. It's the least I can do after all the harm I've caused." Victoria's gesture deeply moved everyone. It was the final proof of her transformation, of her true repentance and love for her family. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. As Sophie prepared for the trip, the family worked tirelessly to gather the necessary funds without compromising the foundation's mission. News of Sophie's situation spread quickly, and to everyone's surprise, the community they had helped began to mobilize. Small donations started pouring in from everywhere, from children at the community center donating their savings to local entrepreneurs organizing fundraising events. This unexpected support not only helped financially, but also demonstrated the real impact that the Richard Martinez Foundation had had on people's lives. The night before Sophie's trip, the family gathered in her hospital room. Sophie, although weak, was smiling. "I'm so proud of all of you," she said softly. "You've turned our family into something beautiful, something that goes beyond blood or last name." Victoria, with tears in her eyes, hugged her daughter. "You've taught us the true meaning of love and strength, my girl." Luke and Emily, holding hands, nodded silently. At that moment, Emily knew that, no matter what the future held, they would face any challenge together. Months later, Sophie returned home. Her health significantly improved thanks to the treatment. Her recovery became a symbol of hope, not only for the family, but for the entire community that had supported them. On a warm spring afternoon, the Martinez family organized a big celebration in the mansion's garden. They were there not only to celebrate Sophie's recovery, but also to commemorate the first anniversary of the Richard Martinez Foundation. As she looked around, Emily saw Luke playing with children from the community center, Victoria animatedly conversing with some of the beneficiaries of the foundation's programs, and Sophie, radiant in her wheelchair, surrounded by friends and admirers. At that moment, Luke approached Emily, taking her hand. "You know, I think I finally understand what Richard wanted for us," he said softly. "What's that?" Emily asked, looking at him curiously. "This," Luke replied, gesturing towards the scene in front of them. "A family, not just by blood or paper, but by choice. A family that extends beyond ourselves, that embraces an entire community." Emily felt her heart swell with emotion. "You're right," she said, resting her head on Luke's shoulder. "And to think it all started with a simple act of kindness." As the sun set over the Martinez mansion, bathing the scene in a warm golden glow, Emily reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them here. From tragedy and pain had emerged love, compassion, and a shared purpose. The Martinez family had found their true legacy, one that went beyond money or social status. They had discovered the transformative power of love, forgiveness, and unity, and as Emily looked at Luke, she saw in his eyes a future full of possibilities, a future they would face together, as a family. In the broadest and most beautiful sense of the word,